The scream pierced the night, tearing across the vast Arizona desert like a wounded animal. Clara Goodwin jolted awake in her bed, her nightgown soaked with sweat, despite the cool September air of 1883. The nightmare had returned, the one where flames licked at her skin, and smoke filled her lungs until she couldn't breathe. Instinctively, her trembling hands reached for the high collar of her nightdress, making sure it was securely fastened, hiding what lay beneath. Dawn was still hours away, but Clara knew sleep would not return. She lit the oil lamp by her bedside, casting eerie shadows across the small bedroom of her newly rented cottage at the edge of Jerome, Arizona. 3 weeks in this mining town, and not a single person knew her story exactly as she intended. She'd come to this bustling frontier town seeking anonymity, a fresh start where no one would look at her with pity or disgust. The floorboards creaked as Clara crossed to the wash basin, carefully avoiding the small mirror mounted above it. Her morning ritual never varied. She washed without looking at her reflection. When the water touched her neck, she winced, the scarred tissue still sensitive even 5 years after the fire that had claimed her parents' lives and marked her forever. After dressing in a high-necked blouse and long skirt, her uniform of concealment, Clara prepared for another day at Wilcox's general store, where she'd secured a position as a shop clerk shortly after arriving in town. Mr. Wilcox had been kind enough to hire her without asking too many questions, something Clara was profoundly grateful for. The journey from her cottage to the center of Jerome took 15 minutes on foot. Clara clutched her shawl tightly around her neck, despite the promise of another scorching Arizona day. The town was already stirring to life, miners heading to their shifts, shopkeepers sweeping porches, and the saloon finally quieting after a night of revelry. "Morning, Miss Goodwin," called Mrs. Patterson from her bakery doorway. Clara nodded politely, but didn't stop for conversation. She'd perfected the art of being pleasant yet distant, friendly enough to avoid suspicion, but reserved enough to prevent questions about her past, or worse yet, invitations that might require her to socialize. The bell above Wilcox's general store jingled as Clara entered, greeting the familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dried goods. "Right on time as always," Mr. Wilcox said from behind the counter, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose as he reviewed the ledger. "Mind unpacking the new shipment that arrived yesterday? Got some fancy fabric from back east the ladies have been asking for." "Of course," Clara replied, grateful for tasks that kept her occupied and away from too much customer interaction. The morning passed uneventfully until the door swung open with such force that the bell nearly flew off its hook. A tall man stumbled in, blood seeping through his shirt at the shoulder. "Mr. Wilcox," he gasped, "got a situation out at the Tanner Ranch. Rustlers hit during the night. Owen's holding them off, but he's down 2 men and needs supplies." Clara froze at the mention of a wounded rancher, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "Lord Almighty," Mr. Wilcox exclaimed, already gathering bandages and medicine. "How bad is he hurt?" "Just grazed. Stubborn fool wouldn't even let me look at it proper. Says he can't leave the ranch undefended with the rustlers still in the area." The messenger, who Clara recognized as the Tanner Ranch foreman, began listing supplies they needed. Mr. Wilcox turned to Clara. "Miss Goodwin, would you mind gathering these items? I need to send word to Sheriff Davis." Clara nodded, moving mechanically through the store, collecting ammunition, more bandages, and food supplies. Her thoughts, however, were with the wounded rancher. She knew the pain of injuries left untended, knew how infection could set in when pride prevented proper care. Before she could stop herself, Clara spoke up. "Mr. Wilcox, perhaps they could use some help out there, someone with experience treating wounds." The words tumbled out before she could reconsider. Mr. Wilcox looked at her with surprise. "You have medical training, Miss Goodwin?" Clara swallowed hard. "Some. My mother taught me." It wasn't a lie. Her mother had been a skilled healer in their small Kansas town before the fire. "Well, I'm sure they could use all the help they can get," the foreman interjected, eyeing Clara with newfound interest. "Miss, if you're willing to come, we'd be much obliged." Clara's mind raced. What was she doing? She'd spent years avoiding situations that might expose her scars or her past. Yet something compelled her, perhaps the memory of her own untreated burns, the agony that might have been lessened with proper care. "I'll need to gather some supplies from my cottage," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. An hour later, Clara found herself in a wagon headed toward the Tanner Ranch, 10 miles outside Jerome. The foreman, who'd introduced himself as Hank, drove the team of horses at a punishing pace over the rugged terrain. Clara clutched her medical bag containing herbs, salves, and knowledge that had been her mother's legacy to her. "Owen Tanner's a good man," Hank said, breaking the silence. "Built that ranch from nothing 5 years ago. Most hardworking, fair-minded boss I've ever had." Clara nodded, only half listening as anxiety gnawed at her. What if the rancher's wounds required her to remove her high collar or roll up her sleeves? What if, in the heat of treatment, her own scars became visible? She adjusted her shawl nervously. The Tanner Ranch came into view. As they crested a hill, a substantial main house with several outbuildings, corrals, and pasture lands stretching toward the distant mountains. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Clara could see men positioned defensively around the property, rifles at the ready. Hank drove directly to the main house, where a tall figure stood on the porch, rifle in hand. Even from a distance, Clara could see the dark stain on his shirt shoulder had spread. "Brought supplies, Owen," Hank called out as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "And a nurse from town." Clara's heart pounded as she looked up at Owen Tanner for the first time. He stood well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a stance that suggested he wasn't a man who backed down easily. His face, partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, was striking, strong-jawed with penetrating blue eyes that assessed her with curiosity. "Don't recall asking for a nurse," he said, his voice deep and tinged with pain he was clearly trying to mask. Clara steeled herself, climbing down from the wagon. "Mr. Tanner, I understand you have a bullet wound that needs tending." "It's just a graze," he insisted, though his pallor suggested otherwise. "A graze that's been bleeding for hours can be as dangerous as a direct hit," Clara countered, surprised at her own boldness. "Infection doesn't care about your pride, Mr. Tanner." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. After a tense moment, he nodded toward the house. "Come on in, then, but make it quick. Those rustlers might return any time." Clara followed him inside, noting how he favored his right side. The ranch house was surprisingly well appointed for a bachelor's residence. Solid furniture, clean floors, and shelves lined with books. A large fireplace dominated one wall of the main room. "Sit down before you fall down, Mr. Tanner," Clara instructed, setting her bag on the table. To her surprise, he complied, sinking into a chair by the fire. The lamplight illuminated his features better now. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or 31, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into the sun and a life lived outdoors. "I need to see the wound," Clara said, her voice softening. "You'll have to remove your shirt." Owen hesitated before unbuttoning his bloodied shirt with his good hand. Clara kept her face professional as he revealed a well-muscled chest and the angry wound on his upper shoulder. "This is no graze, Mr. Tanner. The bullet's still in there." Owen's jaw tightened. Can you get it out? Clara nodded, though inwardly she trembled at what she must do. I need hot water, clean cloths, and whiskey both for the wound and for you. While Hank gathered the items, Clara prepared her instruments. She'd assisted her mother with bullet removals before, but never performed one herself. The closest she'd come was digging shards of glass from her own flesh after the fire, alone and terrified in a stranger's barn. "This will hurt," she warned Owen as she poured whiskey over her hands and instruments. "Not my first bullet," he replied grimly. "Do what you need to do." Clara took a deep breath and began cleaning around the wound. Owen didn't flinch, though she knew it must be painful. His stoicism reminded her of her father, a thought she quickly pushed away. "How long have you been in Jerome?" Owen asked, clearly trying to distract himself as she probed the wound. 3 weeks, Clara replied, focused on her task. "And before that," Clara's hands stilled momentarily. "Various places I move around." Owen's eyes studied her face. Running from something, the question hit too close to home. Clara chose not to answer, instead warning, "I'm going to remove the bullet now. Take a drink of whiskey." Owen obeyed, taking a long pull from the bottle before setting it down. His eyes never left her face as she worked, extracting the bullet with steady hands despite her inner turmoil. "There," she said finally, dropping the bloody projectile into a bowl. "Now I need to clean and stitch the wound." As she worked, the heat in the room grew oppressive. Sweat beaded on her forehead and upper lip. Without thinking, Clara reached up to loosen her collar slightly, just a fraction, but it was enough. Owen's gaze fixed on the small patch of revealed skin at her throat. Clara froze, realizing her mistake. She quickly readjusted her collar, but the damage was done. She'd seen the flicker of recognition in his eyes, not of who she was, but of what she was hiding. "Burns?" he asked quietly. Clara's hands trembled as she resumed stitching his wound. "We're discussing your injury, Mr. Tanner, not mine." Owen fell silent, but his eyes held a new awareness as he watched her finish bandaging his shoulder. The moment she tied off the last strip of cloth, Clara began packing her supplies, eager to escape his penetrating gaze. "You did fine work," Owen said as she fastened her bag. "Thank you, Miss Goodwin, Clara Goodwin. Miss Goodwin, I'm in your debt." Clara stood, adjusting her shawl securely around her neck. "You should rest and keep the wound clean. Change the bandage daily. If there's redness or unusual swelling, you'll need to see a proper doctor." Before Owen could respond, shouting erupted outside. Hank burst through the door, rifle in hand. "They're back, Owen. At least 6 of them, coming fast from the south ravine." Owen was on his feet instantly, reaching for his gun with his good arm. "Get Miss Goodwin somewhere safe," he ordered Hank. "I can help," Clara protested. "There may be more injuries." "Not if I can help it," Owen growled, checking his pistol. "Hank, take her to the root cellar. It's the safest place if bullets start flying." Clara wanted to object further, but the determined set of Owen's jaw told her it would be futile. She allowed Hank to usher her through the kitchen to a trapdoor in the floor. The root cellar was cool and dark, lined with shelves of preserves and sacks of potatoes. "Stay put until one of us comes for you," Hank instructed before closing the trapdoor, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and the distant sound of gunfire. Time passed agonizingly slowly in the dimly lit cellar. Clara strained to hear what was happening above, catching occasional shouts and gunshots. She paced the small space, worrying about Owen's wound reopening in the fight. Would all her careful work be undone by his stubbornness? After what seemed like hours but was probably less than one, the trapdoor opened. Clara looked up, expecting Hank, but instead found Owen peering down at her, his face smudged with dirt and gunpowder. "It's safe now," he said, extending his hand to help her up. The rustlers won't be bothering us again. Clara took his hand hesitantly, noticing fresh blood on his bandage. You've reopened your wound. Worth it to protect what's mine, he replied, helping her climb the ladder. Sheriff's men arrive just in time. They're taking the surviving rustlers back to town. Clara immediately led him to a chair. Let me check your shoulder. Owen submitted to her examination without protest this time. As she unwrapped the bandage, their faces were close enough that Clara could see flecks of green in his blue eyes. She quickly looked away, focusing on the wound. To her relief, only one stitch had torn. You were lucky, she murmured, repairing the damage. Though lucky might not be the right word for a man who gets shot and then immediately engages in a gunfight. A smile tugged at the corner of Owen's mouth. Are you always this forthright with your patients, Miss Goodwin? Only the stubborn ones, she replied, finishing the new bandage. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them, a current of understanding, perhaps, or simple human connection. Clara was the first to look away, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze. Hank can take you back to town now, Owen said, though he made no move to call his foreman. Clara nodded, gathering her supplies. Remember what I said about keeping the wound clean. Actually, Owen said slowly, I was wondering if you might consider staying on for a day or two. Just to make sure infection doesn't set in, Clara stiffened. I'm sure you have ranch hands who can change a bandage, Mr. Tanner. None with your skill, he countered, and I'd pay you well for your time. Clara hesitated. The offer was tempting. She could certainly use the money, but staying meant more chances for Owen to see beyond her carefully constructed barriers. Already he'd noticed her scars, and his direct gaze made her feel uncomfortably seen. I have obligations at the general store, she said finally. I'll send word to Wilcox. He'll understand. Owen leaned forward, wincing slightly at the movement. Please, Miss Goodwin, I don't ask for help easily, but I'm asking now. Something in his voice, a note of genuine need beneath the strength, made Clara reconsider. And perhaps, she admitted to herself, there was something about Owen Tanner that intrigued her, despite her better judgment. 2 days, she conceded. No more. Owen's smile transformed his face, softening its hard edges. I appreciate it. Hank will show you to the guest room. That night, after checking Owen's wound one final time and ensuring he took some willow bark tea for pain, Clara retired to a comfortable bedroom at the far end of the hallway. The room was surprisingly feminine, with a quilted bedspread and curtains that matched. She wondered briefly whose room this had been, or had been intended for. Sleep eluded her as she listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch at night, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of horses, the creak of the house settling. Her thoughts kept returning to Owen Tanner. There was something compelling about him beyond his obvious physical appeal, a depth of character, perhaps. Or the way he'd looked at her scars with curiosity, rather than revulsion. Clara's hand moved unconsciously to her neck, tracing the raised tissue that extended from her jawline down past her collarbone and across her right shoulder and arm. The fire had taken so much from her, her parents, her home, her sense of beauty. And while the physical pain had eventually subsided, the emotional wounds remained raw, causing her to hide not just her scars but herself. Morning came with the crowing of roosters and the smell of coffee wafting under her door. Clara dressed carefully in the same high-necked blouse and long skirt she'd worn the day before, securing every button before venturing out. She found Owen in the kitchen, attempting to fry eggs one-handed. Without a word, Clara took the spatula from him and nudged him gently aside. Sit down, Mr. Tanner. You shouldn't be using that arm. Owen, he corrected. If you're going to be ordering me around in my own kitchen, you might as well use my Christian name." Clara felt her cheeks warm as she tended to the eggs. "How did you sleep?" "Better than expected, thanks to your tea. The pain's not as bad this morning." "That's good. I'll change your bandage after breakfast." They ate in companionable silence, interrupted only when Hank came in to report that the cattle were secure, and the men were repairing damage from yesterday's confrontation. Owen listened, asking occasional questions, while Clara observed the easy rapport between rancher and foreman. After breakfast, Clara checked Owen's wound in the sitting room light. To her satisfaction, there was no sign of infection, and the swelling had already begun to subside. "You heal quickly," she remarked, applying a fresh bandage. "Good constitution." "My mother always said I was too stubborn to stay sick." Owen watched her hands as they worked. "How about you? How did you come by your knowledge of medicine?" Clara hesitated. "My mother was a healer of sorts. I learned from her. She must be proud of your skills. She died 5 years ago." Clara's voice was flat. Owen's expression softened. "I'm sorry. My parents are gone too. Lost my father to consumption when I was 16. Mother followed a year later. It's why I came west, nothing left for me in Pennsylvania." Clara nodded, understanding the impulse to flee from painful memories. "Is that when you started this ranch?" "No, I drifted for a while first. Worked as a hired hand on ranches throughout Colorado and New Mexico, saved every penny. Bought this land 5 years ago when Arizona was still mostly wilderness." A shadow crossed his face. "Had a partner initially, but that didn't work out." Clara sensed a story there but didn't press. Everyone had secrets after all. The day passed with Clara helping where she could around the ranch house while keeping an eye on Owen's condition. Despite her instructions to rest, he insisted on reviewing ledgers and giving orders to his men from the porch. Clara found herself both exasperated by and admiring of his dedication. By evening, a strange domesticity had settled between them. Clara prepared a simple supper while Owen sat at the kitchen table, telling her stories of the ranch's early days, the harsh winters, the droughts, the triumphs of successful cattle drives. "You've built something impressive here," Clara said as they ate. "It's still a work in progress," Owen replied, his gaze sweeping the room. "A ranch needs more than just cattle and land to truly thrive." There was something in his tone that made Clara look up from her plate. Their eyes met across the table, and she felt that same current from before, a connection she both craved and feared. After supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The heat of the day had given way to a pleasant coolness, and Clara found herself relaxing despite her usual vigilance. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Owen said, his voice low. "Yes," Clara agreed, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "I come out here most evenings," Owen continued. "Reminds me why I chose this life, despite its hardships. What do you think about sitting here alone?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Owen was quiet for a long moment. "The future, mostly. What I want this ranch to become, who I want to become." He turned to look at her. "What about you, Clara? What future do you see for yourself?" The question caught her off guard. For so long, Clara had lived day to day, moving whenever people began asking too many questions or showing too much interest in her past. The idea of planning a future seemed almost foreign. "I haven't thought that far ahead," she admitted. "Why not?" Clara shifted uncomfortably. "Some people don't have the luxury of dreams, Mr. Tanner." "Owen," he corrected again gently. Then, after a pause, "Is it because of your scars?" Clara stiffened, instinctively reaching for her collar. "I should check your bandage before retiring," she said, standing abruptly. Owen caught her wrist lightly with his good hand. "Clara, wait. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have mentioned them." His touch was warm and surprisingly gentle for a man who worked with his hands. Clara could have easily pulled away, but something kept her rooted to the spot. "They don't define you," Owen said quietly. "Whatever happened, however you got them, they're just marks on skin." Clara's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Then tell me." His voice was so earnest, so devoid of the pity she despised, that Clara found herself wavering. "There was a fire," she said finally, the words emerging strained and quiet. "Our house. I was 18. My parents didn't make it out." Owen's hand tightened slightly on her wrist. "And you did, carrying these reminders with you." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Thank you for telling me," Owen said, releasing her wrist. "For what it's worth, I think you're remarkably brave." Clara shook her head. "There's nothing brave about surviving when others didn't." "That's not the bravery I'm talking about," Owen replied. "I mean the courage it takes to keep going, day after day, carrying that weight." His words touched something deep within Clara, a recognition she hadn't known she was seeking. Before she could respond, however, a rider approached the ranch at a gallop. Owen was immediately alert, hand moving to the gun at his hip. "It's just Billy," he said as the rider came into view in the fading light. "One of my hands who was in town." Billy reined in his horse sharply at the porch steps. "Mr. Tanner, got news from Jerome. The rustlers they captured, they're part of the McCready gang. Sheriff says there might be more coming to break them out of jail." Owen frowned. "McCready doesn't take losses well." "How many men does the sheriff have?" "Just his deputy and 2 volunteers. He's asking if you can spare any men." Owen nodded decisively. "Tell Hank to pick 5 men. They'll ride at first light." He glanced at Clara. "And it seems you'll be returning to town tomorrow as well, Miss Goodwin. I won't keep you here with more trouble possibly brewing." Clara wanted to protest, but knew he was right. Her 2 days were almost up anyway, and if there was potential danger, she would only be a liability. "Very well," she agreed. "I'll check your wound once more in the morning before I go." That night, Clara slept fitfully, dreaming of fire and faceless men pursuing her through a burning house. She woke before dawn, her nightgown damp with sweat. Rather than trying to return to sleep, she dressed and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for the men who would be riding to town. She was surprised to find Owen already there, stoking the fire in the cook stove. "You should be resting," she admonished, taking the poker from him. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too much on my mind." They worked side by side, preparing a hearty breakfast of bacon, eggs, and biscuits. By the time the ranch hands gathered in the kitchen, the sun was just peeking over the horizon. After the men had eaten and departed, Clara packed her medical bag and found Owen waiting for her on the porch with the wagon already hitched. "You're driving me yourself?" she asked, surprised. "What about your shoulder?" "It feels much better," Owen insisted. "And I have business in town anyway." The journey back to Jerome was quieter than the frantic ride-out had been. The morning was cool, the desert landscape painted in soft pastels by the rising sun. Clara found herself stealing glances at Owen's profile as he drove, noting the strong line of his jaw and the way the sun brought out gold highlights in his brown hair. "Will you tell me something?" Owen asked after they had been traveling for some time. "That depends on what you want to know," Clara replied cautiously. "Why Jerome? Of all the places you could have gone, why here?" Clara considered the question. "I saw an advertisement for Mr. Wilcox needing help in the store, and Jerome seemed remote enough. People in mining towns tend to mind their own business." "Is that what you want, to be left alone?" "Isn't that what most people want?" Clara countered. Owen shook his head. "No, I don't believe it is. People want connection, Clara, even those who have been hurt." "Connection requires trust," Clara said softly, and trust isn't something I give easily anymore." "Fair enough." Owen guided the horses around a rocky patch in the trail, but hiding isn't the same as healing. The words struck Clara with unexpected force. She'd never thought of her nomadic existence as hiding, but wasn't that exactly what she'd been doing? Moving on whenever anyone got too close, concealing not just her scars but her heart as well. They reached the outskirts of Jerome by mid-morning. The town was unusually quiet. With several armed men positioned on rooftops clearly, the sheriff was taking the threat of the McCready gang seriously. Owen pulled the wagon to a stop in front of Clara's small cottage rather than the general store. "I thought you'd want to freshen up before returning to work," he explained, helping her down from the wagon. "Thank you," Clara said, suddenly reluctant to part ways. "And thank you for your hospitality at the ranch." Owen smiled, the expression warming his eyes. "It's I who should be thanking you, for the medical care and the conversation," Clara nodded, unsure what else to say. After a moment's hesitation, she turned toward her cottage door. "Clara," Owen called after her. When she looked back, he continued, "Would it be all right if I called on you sometime? Perhaps Sunday after church?" The invitation sent a flutter of both excitement and fear through Clara's chest. Part of her wanted to decline immediately to retreat behind her walls of safety. But another part, a part she barely recognized, longed to say yes. I don't attend church services," she said finally. "Then perhaps I could bring you dinner one evening," Owen persisted gently. "No pressure for conversation you're not ready for, just a meal between friends. Friends." The word shouldn't have felt so significant, and yet it did. How long had it been since Clara had allowed anyone to get close enough to call her friend? "I work late most evenings," she hedged. "I can work around your schedule," Owen replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I'm a rather determined man, Miss Goodwin." Despite herself, Clara felt a smile tugging at her lips. "So I've noticed, Mr. Tanner." "Is that a yes?" Clara took a deep breath. "It's a perhaps. I need to think about it." Owen nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. "Fair enough. I'll check with you in a few days." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Clara." "Good day, Owen." The name felt intimate on her tongue. As she watched him drive away toward the sheriff's office, Clara felt a curious mixture of emotions: relief at returning to her solitary routine, yet a strange emptiness too, as if Owen Tanner had taken something vital with him when he left. The next few days passed in a blur of routine. Clara threw herself into her work at the general store, staying late to reorganize shelves that didn't need reorganizing. Anything to avoid returning to her empty cottage, where thoughts of Owen Tanner seemed to lurk in every corner. Word spread through Jerome about the thwarted rustlers and the McCready gang's threats. The sheriff and his men, bolstered by Owen's ranch hands, maintained a vigilant watch over the town. Twice Clara caught glimpses of Owen in the street, talking with the sheriff or consulting with his men, but each time she managed to slip away before he noticed her. On the fourth day after her return, however, Owen appeared at the general store just before closing time. Clara was alone, Mr. Wilcox having departed early for a town council meeting. "Good evening, Miss Goodwin," Owen greeted her, hat in hand. His shoulder appeared to be healing well, judging by the ease with which he moved. "I was hoping to speak with you." Clara nodded, continuing to count the day's receipts. "How is your wound?" "Healing nicely, thanks to your care." Owen approached the counter, setting a small package wrapped in brown paper before her. "I brought you something." Clara looked at the package suspiciously. "What is it?" "Open it and see." With hesitant fingers, Clara unwrapped the package to reveal a book, a collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson. "I noticed you admiring my books at the ranch," Owen explained. "This just arrived on the stage from back east. I thought you might enjoy it." Clara ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you. I do love poetry." "I was also hoping you might have reconsidered my dinner invitation," Owen said, watching her closely. "Nothing fancy, just a meal at the hotel restaurant. The cook there makes a fine beef stew on Thursdays." Clara looked up from the book, meeting his hopeful gaze. She'd spent days convincing herself to decline any further invitation, to maintain the distance that had protected her for so long. Yet now, faced with Owen's genuine smile and the sweet gesture of the book, her resolve wavered. "Just dinner," she clarified. "Just dinner," he confirmed. "Though I wouldn't object to conversation if you're so inclined." Clara surprised herself by laughing softly. "You are persistent, Mr. Tanner." "Owen," he corrected with a grin. "And yes, I am, particularly when something matters to me." The implication that she mattered to him sent an unexpected warmth through Clara's chest. "Very well," she conceded. "Dinner tomorrow." Owen's face lit up with a smile that transformed his features, making him look younger and carefree. "Excellent. I'll call for you at 7 if that suits." After he left, Clara found herself smiling down at the book of poetry, her fingers tracing the gilt-edged pages. It had been years since anyone had given her a gift, let alone one so perfectly chosen. That night, she read the poems by lamplight, finding in Dickinson's words an echo of her own isolation and yearning. One poem in particular caught her attention. "The soul selects her own society, then shuts the door to her divine majority, present no more." The words haunted Clara as she prepared for bed, forcing her to confront the walls she'd built around herself. Had she, like the speaker in the poem, shut the door on the possibility of human connection? And if so, was she truly ready to open it again, even a crack? The following evening, Clara spent more time than usual preparing for dinner. She washed her hair and pinned it in a softer style than her usual severe bun. After much deliberation, she chose a dark blue dress with a high collar and long sleeves, still modest and concealing, but more becoming than her everyday attire. Owen arrived precisely at 7, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest, his usually wind-tousled hair neatly combed. He offered Clara his arm with old-world courtesy, and they walked the short distance to the hotel in companionable silence. The hotel dining room was busy, but not crowded. Owen had secured a table by the window, partially secluded by a potted palm. After they were seated, Clara noticed several curious glances from other diners, no doubt wondering about the reclusive shop clerk suddenly dining with one of the area's most eligible ranchers. "People are staring," she murmured, adjusting her collar nervously. "Let them," Owen replied with a shrug. "Small towns run on gossip. Give them something to talk about, I say." Despite her anxiety, Clara found herself relaxing as the meal progressed. Owen proved to be an attentive companion and a good listener, asking about her interests and sharing stories of his own adventures in the West. He never pressed when she deflected personal questions, seeming to understand instinctively where her boundaries lay. By the time they finished their apple pie dessert, Clara realized with surprise that nearly 2 hours had passed. She couldn't remember the last time she'd enjoyed someone's company so completely or laughed so freely. "Thank you for coming tonight," Owen said as they left the hotel. "I've enjoyed myself immensely." "As have I," Clara admitted. "Much more than I expected to." Owen smiled at that. "High praise indeed, perhaps enough to warrant a second dinner sometime." Clara found herself nodding before she could overthink it. "Perhaps." They walked slowly back to her cottage, the evening air cool and fragrant with desert sage. When they reached her door, Owen took her hand gently. "Good night, Clara," he said, raising her fingers to his lips in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and thrilling. "Sleep well." Clara watched him walk away, her hand still tingling from his touch. Something was happening to her, something both wonderful and terrifying. After 5 years of numbness, she was beginning to feel again, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. Over the next 2 weeks, Owen called on Clara regularly. They dined together 3 more times, walked along the ridge overlooking Jerome one Sunday afternoon, and spent a pleasant evening on her small porch swing, discussing books and the changing desert seasons. Through it all, Owen never once mentioned her scars or pressed her about her past. His patience and respect chipped away at Clara's defenses bit by bit, until she found herself looking forward to their time together with an eagerness that both delighted and frightened her. The third Sunday after their first dinner, Owen invited Clara for a picnic. "There's a spot about an hour's ride from town, a small canyon with a spring and cottonwood trees. It's cooler there and private." Clara hesitated. Their previous outings had all been in town, where she felt safe both from external dangers and from her own growing feelings. A remote picnic felt more intimate, more risky. "I don't ride," she said, which wasn't entirely true. She had ridden as a girl in Kansas, but hadn't been on horseback since the fire. "I have a gentle mare who would suit you perfectly," Owen assured her. "Or we could take the buggy if you prefer." Clara considered declining, but found she couldn't bear the thought of disappointing him. The buggy would be better. The day of the picnic dawned clear and hot, typical for early October in Arizona. Owen arrived at Clara's cottage with a smart 2-wheeled buggy and a picnic basket packed with cold chicken, bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine. The drive to the canyon was beautiful, winding through rock formations that glowed red and gold in the morning sun. Owen pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the Apache and Mexican settlers who had inhabited the land long before Anglo ranchers arrived. "How do you know so much about the history?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. "I make it a point to learn about the places I live," Owen replied. "Seems disrespectful not to." "When I first arrived, I spent many evenings listening to the stories of an old Mexican vaquero who'd been riding these ranges since before the war. And I've had some interesting conversations with Apache traders who still come through occasionally." His respect for the land and its peoples was evident in his voice, adding another dimension to Clara's growing appreciation of Owen Tanner. He wasn't just a handsome face or a successful rancher, he was a man of depth and consideration. The canyon, when they reached it, was even more beautiful than Owen had described. A clear spring bubbled from the rock face, creating a small stream that nurtured a grove of cottonwood trees. The temperature was noticeably cooler in the shade, a welcome relief from the relentless sun. Owen spread a blanket beneath the largest tree and unpacked their picnic while Clara removed her bonnet, allowing the gentle breeze to cool her face. "It's lovely here," she said, gazing at the play of light through the trembling cottonwood leaves. "So peaceful." "I come here when I need to think," Owen admitted, pouring wine into 2 tin cups, "or when the demands of the ranch become too much." Clara accepted the wine, taking a small sip. "Does that happen often, feeling overwhelmed by it all?" Owen settled beside her on the blanket, maintaining a respectful distance. "More often than I let on. Ranching is a hard life, drought, disease, rustlers, market fluctuations. Some days I wonder if I was foolish to think I could build something lasting here." "Yet you persevere," Clara observed. "Stubbornness, remember," Owen smiled, though there was a hint of something darker in his eyes. "Truth is, I don't know any other way to be. Once I commit to something, I see it through for better or worse." The intensity in his voice made Clara wonder if he was still talking about ranching. She busied herself with the food, arranging chicken and cheese on a slice of bread. They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the burble of the spring and the rustling leaves. After they'd finished, Owen leaned back against the tree trunk, looking more relaxed than Clara had ever seen him. "May I ask you something personal, Clara?" he said suddenly. Clara tensed but nodded cautiously. "Why have you never sought treatment for your scars?" "There are doctors back east who specialize in such things now." The question was so unexpected that Clara nearly choked on her wine. That's not something I wish to discuss." Owen didn't push, just nodded thoughtfully. "I apologize, I shouldn't have asked." Clara set down her cup, struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to maintain her privacy, to keep her walls intact. But another part, the part that had been awakening during her time with Owen, longed to share the burden she'd carried alone for so long. "It's not just the physical scars," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's what they represent: failure, loss. My parents died because I couldn't save them." Owen's expression softened with compassion. "Clara, you can't blame yourself for—" "I was the one who knocked over the lamp," Clara interrupted, the words rushing out now that the dam had broken. "We were arguing. My father didn't approve of a young man who'd been calling on me. I was angry, gesturing wildly, and my hand hit the oil lamp. The flame spread so quickly." She swallowed hard. "I made it outside somehow, but when I tried to go back in for them, the roof was already collapsing." Tears streamed down Clara's face now, years of pent-up grief and guilt pouring out. "A neighbor pulled me away, saved me from rushing back into the inferno. For weeks afterward, as I lay recovering from my burns, I wished he hadn't, that he'd let me die with them." Owen moved closer, his hand covering hers on the blanket. "Clara, it was an accident. A terrible accident, but not your fault." "My mother was bedridden with influenza," Clara continued, needing him to understand the full weight of her guilt. "If I hadn't been so caught up in my own selfish concerns, arguing about a boy who meant nothing in the end, she might have had a chance. My father might have had time to carry her out." "You can't know that," Owen said gently. "And you were 18, hardly more than a child yourself. Old enough to know better, old enough to be more careful." Clara wiped at her tears with her free hand. "The scars, they're a reminder of what I did. What I lost, who I was and can never be again." Owen's grip on her hand tightened. "Clara, look at me." Reluctantly, she raised her eyes to his. "We all carry regrets," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "Things we wish we'd done differently, people we've failed. But to let those moments define us, to let them steal our future, that's the real tragedy." Clara shook her head. "You don't understand, don't I?" Owen's expression was pained. "Remember, I mentioned a partner when I started the ranch. His name was Michael Blackburn, my best friend since we were boys in Pennsylvania. We pooled our savings to buy this land, worked side by side for 2 years building something from nothing." He paused, his jaw tight with remembered grief. "One night, we had a disagreement about expanding the herd. I wanted to take on debt to buy more cattle. He thought we should go slowly. Words were exchanged, harsh ones. He rode off angry, heading into town." Owen's eyes had a faraway look now. "There was a flash flood that night in the low canyon. By the time I found him the next morning, he'd been gone for hours. If I hadn't been so stubborn, so convinced I was right, he would have stayed at the ranch. He'd still be alive." Clara stared at him, seeing Owen Tanner in a new light, not just as the confident, successful rancher, but as a man who understood loss and guilt intimately. "How do you bear it?" she whispered. "One day at a time," Owen replied simply. "I honor his memory by making the ranch everything we dreamed it could be, and I try to live in a way that would make him proud, with integrity and purpose." Clara looked down at their joined hands. his tanned and calloused from ranch work, hers pale and slender. "I've been running for so long," she admitted, "hiding not just my scars but myself. I'm not sure I remember how to live any other way." "Perhaps it's time to find out," Owen suggested softly. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Clara felt something shift within her, a wall crumbling, a door opening. Without overthinking, she raised her free hand and slowly, deliberately unfastened the top button of her high collar. Owen watched, his expression solemn, as she undid a second button, then a third, revealing the upper edge of the scarred tissue that covered her neck and collarbone. It was the first time she had willingly shown her scars to anyone since leaving Kansas 5 years ago. "This is who I am," she said, her voice trembling. "This is what's beneath the collars and scarves and long sleeves." Owen's gaze never wavered from her face. "You're beautiful, Clara, scars and all." The simple, heartfelt words broke something open inside Clara. A sob escaped her lips, and suddenly Owen's arms were around her, holding her gently as years of bottled grief and shame poured out. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes burned, while he simply held her, one hand stroking her back in soothing circles. When she finally quieted, Clara realized her head was resting against Owen's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. She should have felt embarrassed by her breakdown or uncomfortable with their proximity, but instead she felt safe, accepted in a way she hadn't been since before the fire. "I'm sorry," she murmured, sitting up and dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. "Don't be," Owen replied. "That was long overdue, I think." Clara nodded, rebuttoning her collar with fingers that trembled slightly. "Thank you for listening, for understanding." "Thank you for trusting me enough to share it," Owen countered. He hesitated, then added, "Clara, I hope you know that my interest in you has nothing to do with pity." "What I feel is," a sharp crack interrupted him, the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot. Owen was on his feet instantly, pulling Clara up with him. "Get behind the tree," he ordered, reaching for the pistol he wore even on their picnic. "What is it?" Clara asked, heart pounding as she pressed her back against the cottonwood trunk. "Not sure," Owen muttered, scanning the canyon rim. But that shot was close, too close to be a hunter. Another shot rang out, sending bark flying from a branch just above their heads. Owen pushed Clara lower, shielding her with his body. "McCready's men," he said grimly. "Has to be. They must have followed us from town." Clara's mind raced with fear and confusion. "Why would they target us on a picnic? I thought they were after the rustlers in jail." "The rustlers were released yesterday. Lack of evidence," Owen explained tersely. "This is about revenge. I testified against McCready's brother last year in Santa Fe. Got him hanged for murder. McCready swore he'd make me pay." The gravity of the situation hit Clara like a physical blow. "This is my fault if I hadn't delayed us with my emotional outburst." "Stop that," Owen interrupted. "This isn't your fault, and we're not done yet." He peered around the tree trunk. "The buggy's too exposed. We'll have to make a run for those rocks by the spring. Better cover there." Clara nodded, gathering her skirts in preparation to run. "On your count. 1, 2, 3. They sprinted for the cluster of boulders, bullets kicking up dirt at their heels. Clara felt something tug at her sleeve just as they reached safety. A bullet had grazed the fabric, missing her arm by inches. Behind the rocks, Owen checked his pistol. "I've got 6 shots. Make them count." "How many of them are there?" Clara asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I counted 2 different rifles, but there could be more." Owen risked a quick glance over the boulder. "They're working their way down the canyon wall, trying to flank us." Clara surveyed their position with growing dread. They were trapped, the spring at their back, rocky walls on 3 sides, and armed men approaching from the only exit. "Owen," she said quietly, "If we don't make it out of this, we will," he cut her off firmly. "I'm not losing anyone else I care about. Not today." The fierce determination in his voice gave Clara courage. She scanned their surroundings, looking for anything that might help. Her eyes fell on the picnic blanket they'd left behind. "The blanket," she said suddenly. "If we could reach it, maybe create a diversion." Owen followed her gaze. "Too exposed. They'd cut us down before we got halfway there." "Not if they're distracted." Clara picked up a sizable rock. "I'll throw this as far as I can toward the canyon entrance. When they fire at the noise, you run for the blanket." Owen looked skeptical. "It's too risky." "You have a better idea." After a moment's hesitation, Owen nodded. "All right, but be careful." Clara took a deep breath, then hurled the rock with all her strength toward the canyon entrance. It clattered loudly against the stone wall, and immediately 2 shots rang out in that direction. Owen seized the opportunity, sprinting to the blanket and snatching it up before diving back behind the boulders. "Now what?" he panted. "We soak it in the spring," Clara explained, already dipping one end into the water. "Then you shoot at the dry brush on the slope above them. The wet blanket will protect us from the worst of the smoke." Owen's eyes widened with understanding. "Create a fire to drive them back." "Clara Goodwin, you are full of surprises." Working quickly, they soaked the blanket thoroughly. Owen took careful aim at a patch of dry brush on the slope where they'd glimpsed movement. "When I fire, be ready to run," he instructed Clara. "Head straight for the buggy, don't stop for anything." Clara nodded, gripping the wet blanket. "Be careful." Owen's first shot missed, but his second hit the mark. The dry brush caught immediately, flames spreading rapidly in the hot, dry air. Smoke billowed down the canyon wall, obscuring their attackers from view. "Now!" Owen shouted, grabbing Clara's hand. They ran, holding the wet blanket above them as a shield. Gunshots sounded, but they were wild, their attackers blinded by smoke and distracted by the advancing fire. They reached the buggy, and Owen practically threw Clara onto the seat before leaping up beside her. He slapped the reins against the horse's back, and they lurched forward, racing out of the canyon as shouts and curses faded behind them. Clara clung to the seat as the buggy bounced over the rough terrain, her heart pounding with fear and exhilaration. Owen drove with grim determination, frequently checking behind them for pursuit. "Will they follow us?" Clara asked, raising her voice over the rumble of wheels and the horses' pounding hooves. "Maybe once they regroup," Owen replied. "But we've got a good head start, and the road to town is mostly open. They'd be foolish to attack us in plain sight of other travelers." Clara nodded, trying to calm her racing pulse. Now that the immediate danger was past, the full reality of what had happened began to sink in. She'd nearly died today, they both had. And yet, strangely, she felt more alive than she had in years. When they reached the main road to Jerome, Owen slowed the horse to a more sustainable pace. Clara became acutely aware of her disheveled appearance. Her hair had come loose from its pins. Her dress was damp and dirty, and her face was likely smudged with dirt and tears. "Are you all right?" Owen asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "You weren't hit?" "No, I'm fine," Clara assured him, "just shaken." Owen's jaw was tight with anger. "I'm sorry, Clara, I never should have put you in danger." "You didn't know they would follow us," Clara pointed out. "And I'm not exactly sorry it happened." Owen looked at her in surprise. "You're not," Clara shook her head. "For 5 years I've been existing, not living. Today I felt alive. Scared out of my wits, yes, but alive." A slow smile spread across Owen's face. "You were magnificent back there." "Quick thinking, brave. I don't know many men who would have kept their wits about them the way you did." Clara felt a flush of pride at his words. For so long, she'd seen herself as damaged, broken, a victim of circumstances. Today, she'd been something else entirely, a survivor, a fighter. They reached Jerome by mid-afternoon, the town blissfully normal and peaceful compared to their harrowing experience. Owen drove directly to the sheriff's office, where they reported the ambush. Sheriff Davis immediately dispatched men to search for McCready's gang, though both he and Owen doubted they would find them. "They'll have scattered by now," Owen explained as he walked Clara back to her cottage afterward. "McCready's too smart to linger after a failed attempt." "Will they try again?" Clara asked, unlocking her door with hands that still trembled slightly. Owen's expression was grim. "Possibly. McCready's not one to give up easily." Clara nodded, processing this new reality. "What will you do? Double the guards at the ranch, warn my men to stay alert." "And?" He hesitated, looking at Clara intently. "I'd feel better if you stayed somewhere in town for a while, somewhere with other people." Clara understood his concern, but the thought of leaving her private sanctuary, of having to hide her scars around strangers day and night, filled her with dread. "This is my home, Owen. I can't run away again." Owen studied her face for a long moment. "Then let me post a man outside, at least for a few nights." Clara wanted to refuse, to assert her independence, but the memory of bullets flying past her head was still too vivid. "All right," she agreed, "but just for a few nights." Owen nodded, relief evident in his eyes. "I'll send Hank over. He's the best man I have, steady and discreet." As Owen prepared to leave, Clara caught his arm. "You never finished what you were saying. At the canyon before the shots." Owen's eyes softened. "No, I didn't." He took a deep breath. "What I was trying to say, Clara, is that what I feel for you goes beyond admiration or friendship. I care for you deeply. More than I've cared for anyone in a very long time." Clara's heart beat faster at his words. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the vulnerability of caring too much. But the events of the day had shown her the cost of such self-isolation. "I care for you too," she admitted quietly, "and it terrifies me." Owen took her hand gently. "Fear is natural when something matters. But I promise you this. I will never hurt you intentionally, and I will never, ever see you as anything less than the remarkable woman you are." Clara looked up into his earnest face and made a decision. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and unfastened the top 3 buttons of her collar, revealing the upper edge of her scars. "These go down my neck, across my right shoulder, and down my arm to the elbow," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "There are smaller ones on my back and side. They're not pretty, Owen." Owen's gaze never wavered. With infinite gentleness, he raised his hand and lightly touched the edge of the scarred tissue visible at her collarbone. Clara flinched slightly but didn't pull away. "Beauty isn't just smooth skin and perfect features," Owen said softly. "It's courage in the face of loss, intelligence when pressed by danger, kindness despite having every reason to be bitter." His fingers moved to tip her chin up. "When I look at you, I see all of those things, Clara. And yes, I see the scars too as part of who you are, not something that defines you." Tears welled in Clara's eyes at his words. How long had she waited to hear someone say exactly that? To be seen as a whole person, not just damaged goods. Owen leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. When she didn't, he pressed his lips gently to hers in a kiss that was both tender and reverent. The touch of his mouth on hers sent a wave of warmth through Clara's body. She had been kissed before, awkward, fumbling encounters with the boy her father had disapproved of, but never like this. Never with such care, such respect, such love. When Owen finally pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. "I should go," he said, his voice rough. "Hank will be here within the hour." Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Owen squeezed her hand once more, then turned to leave. "Owen," she called after him, When he looked back, she continued, "Be careful. McCready's men could target you at the ranch as well." "I will," he promised with a smile that made her heart flutter. Sweet dreams, Clara. That night, despite the guard outside and the lingering threat of McCready's gang, Clara slept more peacefully than she had in years. Something fundamental had shifted inside her, a burden lightened, a possibility embraced. For the first time since the fire, she allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by loss and shame, but by connection and, perhaps, love. The next week passed in a blur of activity. News of the ambush spread quickly through Jerome, and Clara found herself the object of curious stares and whispered conversations. Rather than shrinking from the attention as she once would have, she held her head high and went about her business with newfound confidence. Owen came to town daily, ostensibly to consult with Sheriff Davis about McCready, but he always made time to visit Clara at the store or escort her home in the evenings. Their relationship evolved with each encounter, shared stories, lingering touches, and increasingly passionate kisses in the privacy of her porch. On Saturday evening, a week after the canyon incident, Owen invited Clara to dinner at the hotel again. This time, however, he seemed distracted, almost nervous, so unlike his usual composed self that Clara grew concerned. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they finished their meal. "You seem preoccupied." Owen set down his coffee cup, his expression serious. "I received a telegram today from the U.S. Marshal in Prescott. They've captured 2 of McCready's men and believe McCready himself has fled to Mexico." Clara felt a surge of relief. "That's good news, isn't it?" "Yes," Owen agreed, "but it's made me realize something." He reached across the table, taking her hands in his. "Life is unpredictable, Clara, dangerous sometimes. What happened at the canyon, it could have ended very differently." Clara nodded, uncertain where he was going with this. "I've spent the past 5 years building a ranch, making it successful. But success means nothing without someone to share it with." Owen's grip tightened on her hands. "I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Clara Goodwin. I love your strength, your intelligence, your compassion, everything about you." Clara's heart pounded so hard she was sure the entire dining room must hear it. "Owen, please, let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight. What I'm asking is for you to consider coming out to the ranch tomorrow. I want to show you something important to me. After that, if you're willing, I have a question I'd like to ask you." Clara didn't need to guess what that question might be. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. Was she ready for what Owen was proposing? Could she truly leave behind the safety of isolation for the risk and reward of loving someone again? "I'll come," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Owen's face lit up with a smile that melted any remaining resistance in Clara's heart. She loved this man, had loved him perhaps, since that first day at his ranch, when he'd looked at her scars with understanding rather than revulsion. The only question now was whether she was brave enough to act on that love. The following day dawned clear and mild, a perfect early autumn Sunday. Clara dressed with special care in her best dress, a deep green silk with a slightly lower neckline than her usual attire. After a moment's hesitation, she left off the scarf she typically wore as an extra layer of concealment. The dress's collar still covered the worst of her scars, but the gesture felt significant, a step toward the woman she wanted to be rather than the one fear had made her. Owen arrived promptly at 10, driving a freshly painted buggy pulled by 2 matched bays. His face when he saw Clara made any lingering self-consciousness vanish. The admiration in his eyes was unmistakable and entirely genuine. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her into the buggy. The ride to the ranch was filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences. Clara found herself studying the landscape with new eyes, imagining what it would be like to call this wild, beautiful country home. When they arrived at the ranch, Owen didn't drive directly to the main house as Clara expected. Instead, he turned down a side trail that led toward a stand of cottonwood trees similar to those in the canyon where they'd been ambushed. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, curious. "You'll see," Owen replied with a mysterious smile. They rounded a bend in the trail and Clara gasped. Before them stood a small house newly built, judging by the fresh-cut lumber and clean lines. It was a simple structure, a cabin really, but charming, with a wide porch and large windows. Owen brought the buggy to a stop and helped Clara down. "This is what I wanted to show you. It's lovely," Clara said, admiring the craftsmanship. "When did you build it?" "I started it 3 years ago after Michael died," Owen explained, leading her toward the porch. "It was meant to be a place where I could come to think, to remember him. But over time, it became something else, a symbol of the future I hope to build." He opened the door, ushering Clara inside. The interior was simple but thoughtfully designed: a main room with a stone fireplace, a small kitchen area, and 2 doors leading to what Clara presumed were bedrooms. "It's not finished yet," Owen continued, watching her reaction. "The furniture is minimal, and it needs a woman's touch. But it has good bones." Clara walked slowly around the room, trailing her fingers over the smooth wooden mantel. "Why show me this now?" Owen took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Clara's heart leapt into her throat. "Because I want this to be our home, Clara. Not the main house that can be for ranch business and hands, but this would be just for us." He opened the box, revealing a simple but elegant gold ring set with a single diamond. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to build a life with me here." Clara stared at the ring, emotions warring within her. Joy, fear, hope, doubt all swirled together in a dizzying mix. "Owen, we've only known each other a few weeks," she stammered. "I know," he acknowledged. "And if you need more time, I'll wait. But I also know what I feel, Clara. I love you, all of you, and I think you love me too." "I do," Clara admitted, the words bringing both relief and terror. "But there's so much you don't know about me, so many ways I'm broken." "You're not broken," Owen interrupted firmly. "Wounded, yes. Healing, yes, but not broken." He took her hand gently. "We all have scars, Clara, some visible, some hidden. I'm offering to help carry yours if you'll help carry mine." Tears filled Clara's eyes at his words. For 5 years, she'd carried her guilt and shame alone, believing no one could ever truly understand or accept her as she was. Yet here stood a man offering exactly that, not despite her scars but with full knowledge of them. Clara took a step toward him, then another. With trembling fingers, she began unfastening the buttons of her dress collar, then the high neck of her chemise beneath. Owen watched, his expression solemn, as she revealed her scars fully for the first time: the mottled, reddened skin that covered her neck and disappeared beneath her bodice, continuing down her right shoulder and arm. "This is who I am," she said quietly. "This is what loving me means, accepting." Owen set the ring box on the mantel and closed the distance between them. With infinite tenderness, he traced the edge of a scar that ran along her collarbone. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Brave. Survivor." Then he bent and pressed his lips to the scarred tissue at the base of her throat. Clara gasped, not in pain but in wonder. No one had ever touched her scars with such reverence, such acceptance. Owen raised his head, meeting her eyes. "I love all of you, Clara Goodwin. The woman you were before the fire, the woman you became because of it, and the woman you're still becoming every day." Clara's last defenses crumbled at his words. She raised herself on tiptoes and kissed him, not the hesitant kisses they'd shared before, but one filled with all the love and hope and possibility she suddenly felt. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Clara smiled through her tears. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you, Owen Tanner." Owen's face lit up with joy. He retrieved the ring from the mantel and slipped it onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had been made for her. "When?" he asked, drawing her into his arms again. "Soon," Clara replied, surprising herself with her certainty. "I'm tired of waiting for life to begin." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony in Jerome's newly built church. Clara wore a dress she'd made herself, ivory silk with a modest but not severe neckline that revealed the upper edge of her scars. It was a declaration of sorts, an announcement that she was done hiding. Mr. Wilcox gave her away, beaming with paternal pride. Hank stood as Owen's best man, and several ranch hands and townspeople Clara had come to know attended. Sheriff Davis was there too, with the news that the last of McCready's gang had been captured near the Mexican border. McCready himself remained at large, but the immediate threat to Owen and Clara had passed. After the ceremony, the newlyweds returned to the ranch, to the small house by the cottonwoods that was now their home. As Owen carried Clara over the threshold, she felt a sense of completion, of rightness, that she had never expected to find again after the fire. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new bedroom, Clara whispered the story of her scars once more, not the abbreviated version she'd shared at the canyon, but the full tale, with all its pain and guilt and shame. Owen listened, holding her close, offering comfort without judgment. When she finished, he said simply, "Thank you for trusting me with your past. Now, will you trust me with your future as well?" Clara nodded, her heart full. Yes, all of it, and she did. Day by day, month by month, Clara Goodwin Tanner learned to live again, not just exist, but truly live, with all the joy and pain that entailed. She stopped hiding her scars, first with Owen, then with Hank and the other ranch hands who quickly became like family, and eventually even in town. There were still difficult days, of course. Nightmares that left her gasping and trembling. Moments when grief ambushed her unexpectedly. But Owen was always there, patient and steady, reminding her that healing wasn't about erasing the past, but about building something new alongside it. A year after their wedding, Clara gave birth to a son they named Michael, after Owen's lost friend. As she held her newborn child, marveling at his perfect small features and the miracle of new life, Clara realized how far she had come from that terrified, shame-filled young woman who had arrived in Jerome. "He's beautiful," Owen said, sitting beside her on the bed, his arm around her shoulders. "Just like his mother." Clara leaned into his embrace, content in a way she had once thought impossible. "I never imagined I could be this happy again," she admitted. "After the fire, I thought that part of life was over for me. And now?" Owen asked, brushing a kiss against her temple. Clara smiled down at their son, then up at the man who had seen beyond her scars to the woman beneath. "Now I know that some endings are really beginnings in disguise." Outside their window, the Arizona sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors that had once destroyed Clara's world, and now illuminated her new one. The scars remained, both physical and emotional, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they were simply part of her story, a story of loss and healing, of shame and acceptance, of a woman who had learned that being broken didn't mean being unfixable, and of a cowboy who had loved her anyway. 2 years later, Clara stood on the porch of their house, watching as Owen taught their son to ride his first pony. Michael, now 3, squealed with delight as the gentle mare walked in slow circles, his father's strong hands keeping him secure in the saddle. Clara's hand rested on her swollen belly, feeling the movements of their second child, a daughter, she suspected, though Owen insisted it would be another boy. Their friendly disagreement had become a running joke between them. The ranch had prospered under Owen's careful management and Clara's increasingly confident partnership. She had discovered a talent for breeding and training horses, developing a line of mounts that were becoming known throughout the territory for their intelligence and steady temperament. More remarkably, Clara had found herself emerging as something of a healer for the ranch community. It began simply enough tending injuries, preparing remedies for common ailments, but soon expanded to include attending births and treating serious conditions when the doctor from Jerome couldn't be fetched in time. The scars that had once been her shame became, ironically, a source of credibility. If she could survive that, people would say, she must know something about healing. And she did, not just about physical healing but the emotional kind as well. Clara found herself counseling young women who had suffered their own traumas, sharing her journey from hiding to acceptance. It wasn't always easy to speak of the fire and its aftermath, but each telling seemed to diminish its power over her. Owen had kept his promise, helping carry her burdens while allowing her the space to grow into her strength. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They had their disagreements, their moments of frustration, but it was built on a foundation of genuine respect and understanding that weathered every storm. As Clara watched Owen swing Michael down from the pony, their son's laughter carrying across the yard, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for Owen and their children, but for her own journey, for every painful step that had led her here, to this life she would never have dared to imagine. Owen looked up, catching her watching them. His smile, even after 3 years of marriage, still made her heart beat faster. He said something to Michael, and they both waved enthusiastically. Clara waved back, her scarred hand raised proudly in the sunlight. Once, she had believed those scars marked the end of her life. Now she understood they had simply been the beginning of a different one filled with deeper compassion, truer love, and the kind of strength that comes only from being broken and putting oneself back together again. Different, yes. Marked, yes. But whole. Completely, wonderfully whole. And loved. Above all, loved.